Morning, educators.
Good morning, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. Lots of public holidays happening in April, so we're going to get right stuck into our POPI Portal for training number 2 of 7, dealing with finance and human resources.
Because, Peter, the POPI Portal is our school's personal information impact assessment. And this impact assessment needs to be complete by
1st of May.
1st of May. So the time is ticking on, and we're going to do 4 sub-processes today. What are we going to look at?
We are dealing with debtors, specifically under finance, as well as payroll, and then move files, as well as staff training.
HR management and maintenance of files.
Lots of personal information.
I have a story coming on. So yesterday,
Please share with us.
So yesterday, Peter, my little boy is start here. Yesterday I get a phone call from the school.
Yes.
It comes up on my phone, I pick it up, and the school sister's on the other line. Never good when the school sister's on the phone, right?
Yeah.
And she's, Michelle, acting calm. You need to come and get James now. Mm-hmm. Okay. He is translucent.
Oh no, Michelle.
And he's fainting. And I'm, yes, I'm not panicked at all, because as it turns out, he has a condition. So I'm like, oh, sister, are you aware of the condition? Mm-hmm. The reason that I ask this is because he's been at the school, this is year number 5. But previously, in the first 4 years, he's been in the junior prep. He's just transitioned this year into the senior prep. And in the senior prep, it's a new sister. And everyone at the school knows my little guy. When he has his fainting spells, he's got low blood sugar, low blood pressure, he gets a fright or a shock, and boom, he's on the floor, right? But the senior prep doesn't understand. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I not share this very important information either with the sister at the school or with his teacher? As it turns out, his teacher does phone me later, or she actually WhatsApps me late in the evening. She says, how is the little guy today, this evening? I'm like, he's much better, but I feel terrible because I think that I neglected to share his condition with you, not transferring it between the 2 sides of the school. And she said, no, it was there. The file is a written piece of paper, and I remembered filling it in with the forms at the beginning of the year, where you say, can the school administer painkillers or what medication, and is he allergic to anything, and does he suffer from any conditions that we need to be aware of? And so when that form was submitted in paper format, little guy gives it to his teacher, the teacher gives it to admin gives it to the nurse, and somehow it ends up in a filing cabinet. Hopefully, right? Because that data has been moved around the school. And my little guy's great, the school is great, the teacher's great, the nurse is great, and happy ending of the story. But medical information is what we consider to be special personal information.
That is so correct, Michelle, and that's what we're dealing with today as well in different subsectors or sub-functions of your personal information impact assessment. There is going to be some special personal information that is being shared.
Well, not just medical information, but let's turn across to HR. In the HR department of a school has a legislative requirement to ensure that none of their educators, coaches, admin staff, anyone who comes into contact with children has a conviction for a sexual offense against a minor.
That's correct. And as you might know, that information of a criminal offense forms part of special personal information in terms of POPI.
In the definition, absolutely. So we're going to talk about special personal information, I feel, a lot today. Peter, I'm going to hand over to you because you're going to be taking us through the module or the portal. And our clients, please do feel free to connect with us and follow along online, popia.tpn.co.za, and you can follow as Peter's going through we've done one on a case study, and our schools can follow on their own in their own portal. My job is, of course, to facilitate.
And interrupt me, hopefully, today.
And interrupt you with questions.
So please ask your questions throughout the session. Michelle is going to be taking those sessions directly as facilitator. Remember, you need to be logged into YouTube to be able to ask your questions. We are also going to be providing you with a feedback form link that you need to click on and fill out for us during the 15-minute Q&A right at the end of the session. Right,
and in order to ask questions on the YouTube channel, our clients do need to be logged in order to ask those questions.
Vital.
If the question is of such a nature that I need to interrupt Peter because we're dealing with that section right now, I'm going to do that.
Please do.
Perfect, Peter. If, however, it's more of a general question, I'm going to leave it to the last 15 minutes of the Q&A, and then we'll do that in the Q&A section. So if I'm not asking your question immediately, it's because I'm holding it over for the last 15 minutes. And if we're blurry...
Every time, yes?
No, if we we're not always blurry.
Oh, no.
If we are blurry
Always
on
blurry.
your screen, you've got a little cog on the bottom right-hand corner of your video. Click on that cog and then click on quality, and then change your quality setting to a minimum of 720p. Don't change it to auto. Change it to a minimum of 720p, and then of course I'll be sending those feedback forms out in the end.
And remember, we are doing these training sessions every 2 weeks, so please remember to subscribe to the TPN YouTube channel, as well as clicking the notifications bell, because then it's going to notify you of the new training sessions coming up.
And if you've missed the first couple sessions, go onto our playlist on the YouTube channel and you can catch up with the first sessions prior to this.
Simplifying process.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
Thank you,
Thank
Peter.
you, Michelle. As already mentioned, we are going to go through your personal information impact assessment today through the TPN POPI-Portal for schools. Before we get started, I just want to show you some of the functionality from the system. We do get a lot of questions about this on a daily basis. So I'm just going to show you through the different buttons on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to show you your action plan, your policies and procedures, how to load staff, as well as changing your settings. Remember, when you log into the TPN POPI-Portal for schools initially, the first time, it's going to ask you a couple of setup questions, and they are vital for the proper functioning of the system itself to make sure that you're falling into the right categories when you're doing this. So, to go and have a look what your settings are currently, please click on the settings button over there. The company type, we've already set it up as a school, and we've set it up as a private school. The company name, of course, TPN, the company size, as well as the amount of debtors that we have currently on our books. To add staff members, so staff members to perform different sub-functions under the POPI-Portal for schools, click on the staff function over there, and you can easily go and add different staff members who are going to be the accountable persons to perform the sub-functions. So just click on the add button over there, enter the person's first name, surname, job title, email address, as well as contact number, and then click save. What you'll notice already is that I am an associated person, so I can perform different sub-functions under this POPI-Portal for schools. So, to quickly summarize once again, your action plan is not going to be pre-populated. That is something that you're going to add into as you go through your personal information impact assessment and perhaps see certain gaps in your business where you need to implement different processes as well as protect certain portions of your personal information. So click on the action plan, and then you can easily go and add an action to this list. So you can write something like title, staff training, the focus area is going to be people, the due date, task priority, your status, percentage complete, the linked person, so that is the staff member that you've already added as the accountable person, and a small description of the action that needs to be performed. Lastly, before we get into the different sub-functions that we're going to be focusing on today, remember that we've got all your policies and procedures already loaded directly onto the system. If you click on policies right over there, we've got a wide-ranging format and documentation for you to use at the school, starting from your acceptable usage policies right through to your website terms and conditions if it's necessary, as well as all your other documentation that you might require, like your consent and request forms. And dealing specifically with one of the sub-functions today, we are going to go through training, and this will include your training registers. To download those, you just click on the Word button over there, and it's going to download it to you in Word format. So you can go and change those documents as much as you want, perhaps make it your own, put on your logos, etc. So to get into your personal information impact assessment and to start formulating this process for yourself, click on Impact Assessment and click on Overview. For those of you who joined us for Module 1 of 7, we ran this on the governance function at the school. We are obviously going to go through all of these different functions in the different training sessions, we're going to be dealing with your finance and HR functions today, but there is still upcoming information technology, operations, legal, as well as your sales and marketing. We're going to start off with the finance function today. Click on review all indicators, and then you'll notice we've got multiple different sub-functions falling under this finance function. So remember, the finance function refers to an area that handles the finances within the organization, the school. This includes the budgets, management accounts, debtors, creditors, and financial statements. The two sub-functions that I've chosen for you today is your debtors, obviously something very topical today. We need to collect the money that parents owe us for school fees, as well as your payroll system. Because we're dealing with two different types of personal information here. We're dealing with information on your employees and information on your parents. I decided to go with these two sub-functions. They both will contain quite a high volume of personal information. So to go into your debtors sub-function, just click on the review button, and then it's going to open up a page that looks like this. Debtors are your customers that are paying for your products or services. Debtors can be natural as well as juristic people. Remember, personal information in terms of POPI relates not only to natural people, but also to juristic persons. In this area, there's normally a medium or high amount of personal identifiable information that may be used internally or shared with a third party to manage your debtors. Very important here. Remember, with your payroll, that data might be processed by different third parties. If you're using a debt collector specifically, remember that personal information is being transferred. So it needs to be contextualized, and you need to understand when it comes to your debtors information, what information is actually being processed. So to fill out these first couple of questions, select the accountable person. It's going to be myself. The progress status is it is assigned, and the due date. Let's just make that for today's date. And remember to click the save button. If you click the save button, you'll be able to go out of the system and come back, and that information is going to be saved for you. You'll notice I've already pre-populated certain sections for us today. So with your personal identifiable information, this is very important questions because it sets out your inherent risk already. The risk that you are dealing with depending on how much personal information you are processing as a result of this specific sub-function. And like I said, with your debtors book, there is going to be a lot of personal information being processed as a result. So, volume of personal information being processed in this function. I'm just going to stop here for a moment. Remember, the answers to these questions that I'm taking here today is specifically taken from our case study who has done their personal information impact assessment already. So have a look how they've answered these questions and make sure that you're answering the questions correctly for your own personal information impact assessment. So the volume of personal information being processed in this function. They have selected medium as a result of only their school not being the biggest school around. They only had around about, I think it was 200 parents as part of their debtors book. So they selected medium for this question because, once again, it's contextually based on your specific school. Does it contain sensitive personal information? Now, when we're dealing with personal information specifically, remember that we've got these buttons that open up a wiki that explains to you exactly, say, for example, what is personal information, what is special personal information, or what is information relating to GDPR or European citizens. So I'm going to open up those three for us now. I'm going to explain that to you on this first sub-function. I'm not going to go into them in the other sub-functions, but just to get us in the right mindset for POPI and specifically processing personal information in terms of POPI today, I'm going to go into those wikis. So, sensitive or personal information. Let's have a look at that. So, personal information is information that can identify the data subject. So, identify the data subject. This can include information such as the data subject's ID, bank account details, as well as tax numbers. Very important. The next one that I'm going into is your special personal information. What is special personal information? Special personal information is defined in terms of Section 26. Special personal information includes the data subject's race, color, sexual orientation, physical or mental health, religion, consciousness, medical history, criminal history. So this is once again what Michelle explained to us in her story before the session started. That will specifically fall under medical history. And when we're dealing with criminal history, when we're dealing with your HR management and maintenance of files, remember special personal information on criminal history that you have already performed, you've done a criminal check on that employee, is also going to fall under the definition of special personal information in terms of Section 26. Now, the last one I just want to go into is your GDPR, very important. The GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, is a legal framework that sets guidelines for the collection and processing of personal information from individuals who live in the European Union. This is going to include both European Union citizens as well as residents. So going back into our personal information impact assessment, you already know what these different terms mean. So does it contain personal information? Yes, it will. On your debtors book, you're perhaps going to have ID numbers, you're perhaps even going to have bank account details of that specific parent. So select yes. Does it contain special personal information? Now for your debtors book, most probably not. So let's select no. Does it contain information regarding children? Very important. Because the processing of personal information falls under a different category in terms of the Act, when you're processing information of children, remember guardians need to consent to this information being processed. You need to go and have a look at this. There are certain schools that with their debtors book actually allocate the accounts towards the children at the school rather than the parents. So make sure that when you're busy filling this out, you need to know exactly how your invoices are going out, how your statements are going out, how your debtors book is actually being run. For our case study, they put the accounts in the names of the parents. So they did not process personal information in terms of their debtors sub-function on this. Does it contain personal information of European citizens? And they selected yes, it does. Some of the parents were European Union citizens. Let's click save. The information processed, and I didn't want to type today during the session, so I've actually completed these for us already. You saw how many mistakes I make with spelling sometimes when we do these sessions, so I've already included this for us. So the system where the personal information is being stored is on your server, your client relationship management system, and perhaps also on your data management system. Say, for example, how you actually run your debtors book. Is it paper or electronic? In this instance, it was both paper and electronic, and the level of access control that was specific to your debtors subfunction was medium. The control measures that were in place to process this personal information already taken by the school was policies and procedures, electronic and physical access control, monthly reporting, as well as management review. Remember, when you scroll over these descriptions, it is actually going to give you an example of exactly what we mean when we say for example, electronic access control or physical access control. So those have all been saved already for us. And then we get to the important questions. Now, the reason why we call this important questions is because it deals specifically with your behavioral risk as a result of the processing of the personal information at your school. So it deals with the 8 pillars of lawful processing of personal information in terms of POPI, to basically make sure that you're processing the personal information lawfully. So when we go into this, you'll notice already once again that we've got these information tabs that are going to open us these wikis that explains how the lawful processing of personal information can take place. So first question, is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully? Now we can answer that because we understand the 8 pillars of lawful processing in terms of POPI. If you click on this information tab, it's going to open up the wiki link that explains that to you. Remember, when we're dealing with POPI, we're dealing with these 8 pillars of lawful processing at sort of every single instance. Those are accountability, processing limitations, purpose specification, further processing of further processing limitations, information quality, openness, security safeguards, as well as data subject participation. So please take this into consideration when you're asking your important questions for your personal information impact assessment. So going back to that, is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully according to our debtors subfunction? Yes, it is. Is the processing of personal information done in a reasonable manner so that it doesn't infringe on the data subject's privacy? Yes, it is. Have you applied the rule of minimality? That is, you only process personal information that is adequate, relevant, and excessive. So you're only processing personal information for your debtors sub-function, say, for example, the person's name, bank account details. Not more information is actually being processed in terms of the sub-function. Yes. Is the collection of personal information being done for a specific and explicitly defined purpose? Yes, most certainly. Have you obtained consent from all data subjects in this area where it is considered mandatory according to the Act? This is another one of those wikis I always open up for the training session just to explain to you how consent works in terms of POPI. So let's go into that wiki. How do you know if you need consent from clients and if it is mandatory? Personal information may not be processed without consent unless any one of the factual scenarios in Section 11 is applicable. If any of the factual scenarios is present, consent is not needed. The factual scenarios include if it is required to conclude or perform a contract. The party processing the information is required to do so by law. The processing protects the legitimate interest of the consumer. The processing is necessary for the performance of a public law duty, or it is done in pursuit of the legitimate interests of the responsible party. It is most certainly required to process this personal information in terms of your contract, but also remember, with our policies and procedures, there are certain consent clauses that you can include through your application processes, as well as the contracts that you might have with parents from the start, to make sure that you are gaining that consent to process personal information right from the start of the contract. Michelle, do you have a question for us?
Peter, I always like the consent question when it comes in relation to the credit bureau. So consent in terms of the National Credit Act.
Yes.
Versus consent in terms of POPI for processing of information to collect your debt. So maybe you could quickly touch on, in terms of many schools, they are doing checks on the bureaus, either the private schools for affordability of school fees, or the public schools in terms of assessing for exemptions, and therefore credit bureau information is used in either of those cases. When is consent therefore required in terms of the National Credit Act?
Thank you very much, Michelle. Excellent question. So as you all might know, TPN is a credit bureau. You can perform those credit checks directly through the system, through the tpn.co.za website. The important concept here to understand is that the National Credit Act, as well as POPI, in certain instances requires consent. But let's just focus on the National Credit Act. You must have consent to perform a credit check on any person. That means that the person needs to consent to you seeing that information on that specific credit report. So you do need consent to do so. In terms of POPI, with the processing of personal information, we just went through that specific definition in terms of Section 11 when consent is required. But remember, in terms of the National Credit Act, you must have consent to perform a credit check. Does that answer it, Michelle?
So to simplify then,
Yes.
to do a credit check, you need consent, specific, explicit consent,
Yep.
but to process a debtor's information through your billing system, you don't need consent because it's a requirement in terms of your contract to enable the school to process your information to collect the school fee from you.
And when we're talking about this processing of that personal information from your debtor's book or perhaps from your data management system, that's pushing the data directly into TPN. So you don't need consent to perform that specific function, to process the data in that manner into the credit bureau, but you do need consent to perform the credit check. Thanks, Michelle. So in this instance specifically, yes, we did get consent in terms of the contract that we signed with the parents, but it's not really necessary because we need to do this as it is required to perform the proper obligations and functions of your contract with that specific parent. So click Save. Now the next questions relate to data usage. Do you notify the data subject as required by POPI when collecting personal information from them directly? Yes, in this instance they did. Has the retention and restriction of records been formalized in this area? Just pause here for a moment because this is a question we're going to be dealing with in each and every single sub-function. We do have a retention and destruction policy and procedure as part of the policy documents on the TPN POPI portal. So this school already implemented this policy and procedure to make sure that they are processing the personal information only for a restricted time period in terms of different parts of different pieces of legislation. So you need to go and have a look at that yourself. Go and have a look at the policy and procedure that we've got on retention and destruction. It's going to explain everything to you directly in that. But this school specifically had already implemented this policy and procedure. So we're going to select yes. Yes, Michelle, another question.
No, I was just going to remind our viewers that we have a video on retention and destruction of data coming up in one of the upcoming modules as well.
Thank you, Michelle. So next question, is personal information in this area used for another purpose other than for which it is collected? No, it was not. Have you ensured that personal information in this area is updated on a regular basis? Our school did this on a yearly basis. They sent through new forms so that parents can go and update all those details that is required for the proper processing of this information. So they said yes. And are you satisfied that the appropriate security measures are in place to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal information? Now, I'm going to answer yes on this one because our case study did so, but you need to base this on your own processes and procedures currently in place for your school. So click save. So we've completed one of the sub-functions. It doesn't take that long. Just ask yourself these questions. Remember, you can access your own POPI portal system at the moment and follow with me if you're doing so. Hopefully you do have a lot of questions. Remember, you can also forward us your questions after this session directly through to the help desk email address, which Michelle will put up now. Or even if you've got a legal question on POPI, you can send those through to the legal team at TPN, which Michelle is also going to put up in the chat at the moment. So we've done our first sub-function, quite quick and easy. Let's go back into finance. So debtors completed. We can already go through this. We obviously have a high inherent risk. The reason for this is because the volume of personal information that we're processing, but also remember we indicated that there is special personal information, or rather not special personal information being processed, but personal information being processed that does identify the data subject, natural or juristic person, as well as some information perhaps on European citizens. So we've got a high risk over there. With the residual risk, it's only medium. And the reason for that is because the school has already implemented certain control procedures and control actions to make sure that they are complying with the different parts of POPI when it comes to processing of this information. And then interestingly enough, the behavioral risk is also low, taking into consideration the 10 questions that we asked ourselves on the processing of personal information, taking into consideration the 8 pillars of lawful processing. So the next 3 sub-functions I am going to run through quite quickly. I am going to stop at certain portions because they do differ quite a lot when it comes to certain types of personal information being processed, but we are going to run through them quite quickly today. So the next one we're doing is payroll. Now this deals with different personal information. So let's have a look at this. Payroll may be processed internally or by a third party, which may increase risk. This could include pay information, provisional tax. Payrolls usually have a high amount of personal identifiable information and may also contain sensitive information such as ID numbers. So information that identifies the data subject. So select the accountable person, myself again, progress status planned, and we're going to select again today's date. Remember to click save. Volume of personal information being processed in this sub-function. Our case study selected that it was a high volume of personal information being processed as a result, obviously, of the amount of personal information that they're being processed through their payroll system. You need to take this into consideration when you're doing your own personal information impact assessment. Does it contain sensitive personal information that identifies the data subject? Yes, it does. Does it contain special personal information? No, it does not. Does it contain information regarding children? No, it does not. Does it contain personal information on European citizens? In this instance, they selected no, but possibly through your payroll system, you are doing so. So you need to make sure that the people or the information that you're processing through this does not relate to the GDPR or European citizens and residents. Click save. The information processed, and once again I filled these out for me already. We are processing it through our server and payroll system. Is it paper or electronic? It is paper as well as electronic, and the level of access control through this is high. The control measures that are in place is your policies and procedures, electronic access control, physical access control, as well as management review. Dealing with these important questions once again, is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully? Remember, this only relates to your payroll subfunction. So yes, it is. Is the processing of personal information done in a reasonable manner? Yes. Have you applied the rule of minimality? Yes. Is the collection of personal information done for a specific and explicitly defined purpose? Yes. Have you obtained consent? We have done so. In this instance, the school has already included certain clauses that they've added to the employment contracts to make sure that the consent is given prior to the person actually starting working at the school. Interesting. You need to go and have a look at that as well for your own school and the educators at your school. Click Save. Data usage questions. Do you notify the data subject as required by POPI when collecting personal information? Yes, we do. Has the retention and restriction of records been formalized? We've already talked about this. The school has already implemented their policy and procedure. Yes. Is personal information in this area used for another purpose? No, it is not. Have you ensured that personal information in this area is updated? Yes, they do so. And are you satisfied that the appropriate safety measures are in place? Yes, they selected on that one as well, and click Save. Going back into your finance function, you'll notice already that we've got this payroll system right over there. Michelle, another question.
Peter, I'm thinking of some of the things that our schools could think about in terms of delivery of pay slips.
Oh, please,
so
yes.
Many of the payroll companies, when they issue your pay slips, it's a PDF on an email. And how the school can consider the distribution of those PDFs, are they password protected? Or do the educators or admin staff or coach access their pay slips via link, which is password protected? So the delivery of the information is as important as how it is safeguarded within the payroll environment as a starting point.
So very important. So you need to think about the attachments you're actually attaching to emails as well. Remember that personal information can obviously be intercepted by third parties. It needs to be taken into consideration when you are doing this with your payroll system. How is that information actually being transferred directly to the employee to be able to see what's happening on that
Absolutely.
payslip?
And then, Peter, another one in terms of payroll is how do you keep the data up to date? So the thoughts that I had in mind here were things like if you have a provident fund or death and disability, who are the beneficiaries? And to ensure that our educators, admin, coaching staff keep those beneficiaries up to date. Or a second example would be the medical aid forms.
Nice.
So again, how are you ensuring that that information is updated on an annual basis? So this isn't to answer the questions, it's just to allow our schools to think about these type of processes, practical processes within their environment.
Well, that's a great segue moving into the next function as well, because we're dealing with HR management and maintenance and files, and this is obviously going to include the information that you just spoke about. So just quickly heading through this, it is high inherent risk because of the volume of personal information being processed, the different categories of information. It's low residual risk as a result of the control measures already in place, and then behavioral risk is also low because we're taking into consideration the 8 pillars of lawful processing, and we've implemented certain policies and procedures already. So moving over back to your overview, and heading into your human resources function is quite simple. Just go back into the overview and click Review All Indicators on Human Resources. So the human resources function refers to the area that handles the human side of the organization. This includes recruitment, employment contracts, human resources management, training, industrial relations, and terminations. The 2 sub-functions that we're dealing with today, I've chosen these because with your HR management and maintenance of files, very high volume and different categories of personal information that you might process through the sub-function. But also with your training, not a lot of personal information possibly that you are processing through your training sub-function. So let's head into these. Starting with your HR management and maintenance of files. So this is all the maintenance needed on personnel files and would generally include personal and sensitive information on all current and previous staff members. So we've already setting this up, high volume of personal information. Accountable person, myself, progress status is assigned, and the due date once again is today. With your personal identifiable information, the volume of personal information being processed in this function, we are going to select this as high. Of course, it's HR management and maintenance of files, so all your personnel files is going to fall under the sub-function. Does it contain sensitive personal information? Most certainly it will. It's going to contain information that identifies the specific employee or the person working at the school. We say yes. Does it contain special personal information as defined in terms of POPI? I'm quickly going to run through that definition once again. You need to really take this into consideration when you're doing this HR management and maintenance of files. So let's go into that one. Remember, possibly through your personnel files, you are going to include different categories of this information as well. Michelle mentioned right at the start, we said criminal history. It does fall under this definition. So make sure you are selecting yes if this information is being processed. And I'm sure with all of the schools that is watching today, personal information or special personal information rather is being processed through your HR system. So going back to that, most certainly it does contain information on special personal information. Does it contain information regarding children? Interesting question. Perhaps with your personnel files, you've got beneficiaries, like Michelle said, or information on your Provident Fund that has those beneficiaries already allocated. It's very possible that in an instance like that, there is going to be information on the person's children through their personnel files. So we're going to select yes. Does it contain special information on European citizens? In this instance, our school also selected yes because they do have teachers that are dual citizens that do have European Union citizenship, and click save. Information processed, already filled this out. We've got it through our server and our data management system, paper and electronic, and the level of access control is high. Our control measures we've got in place specifically for the sub-function is policies and procedures, job descriptions, electronic access control, physical access control, management review, and segregation of duties. And getting back to the important questions. Is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully on HR, management, and maintenance of files? Yes, it is. Is processing done in a reasonable manner? Yes, it is. Have you applied the rule of minimality? Interesting question on this one. You most probably only have information in those files because you require that information in terms of your contract, or you require that information to be processed in certain instances. So our case study selected this yes on this one because they're not collecting more information than what is actually required. Is the collection of personal information being done in a specific and explicitly defined purpose? Yes, it is. And have you obtained consent? Once again, your employment contracts, very, very important, and click save. Do you notify the data subject as required by POPI when collecting personal information? Yes, we do. Has the retention and restriction of records been formalized? Same question, yes. Is personal information in this area used for another purpose? No, it is not. Have you ensured personal information in this area is updated? Yes, we do on an annual basis. And are you satisfied that the appropriate security measures are in place? And once again, our case study selected yes on that question. Clicking save and moving back into your human resources function, we can quickly go through these tags. So we've got a high inherent risk, big volume of personal information being processed, a lot of different categories of information that is being processed. The residual risk is low because we've got all these control measures already in place. And then behavioral risk is also low as a result of us answering those questions on the 8 pillars of lawful processing in terms of POPI in the affirmative. Now, the last one for today that we're going to do is your training. And this one's quite simple, quick and easy because there might not be a lot of personal information that is being processed through your training requirements. Click on review. Training includes printed reference material, visual aids, systems to train staff, but one of the big ones that is obviously going to be included over here is your training registers. So take this into consideration when you are completing this sub-function. Peter Menon, progress status assigned, due date is going to be today, and click save. The volume of personal information being processed on this one or on this sub-process, we're going to select low. We're going to take into consideration obviously the information that is being processed on your training registers and different visual aids, but the information is going to be low. Does it contain sensitive personal information? Very possible that your training registers would include ID numbers. Michelle, yes.
You know, Peter, this is fascinating because right now we are asking our delegates to complete the feedback form. And on the feedback form, thank you to the delegates who have started. On the feedback form, TPN is asking our delegates to complete personal information that identifies them as part of our EE submission plan that we submit. And so there is, in our instance, a need for us to safeguard the data that we're collecting about the training feedback that our very clients are participating in at the moment.
Thank you very much for sharing your personal information with us. I promise with our security safeguards in place, we are protecting this information in the way that we are doing it at the moment. Yes, Michelle, go for it.
Peter, Eden Glen Primary have got a question for us. Do you need consent to do a criminal check on a candidate during recruitment?
Great question. This is one of those I sometimes like to make a joke about. For performing criminal checks, it's not as simple as just accessing the system and clicking criminal checks and performing it. Yes, to allocate that criminal check and for us to be able to do so, it is as simple as going into the TPN system. But we need to collect the person's fingerprints or the fingerprint details to be able to perform a criminal check through the systems that we do so through the Credit Bureau. So it is important, yes, you do need consent to perform a criminal check on a person at the school for pre-application or whatever it might be. You do need that consent. One of our representatives at TPN will actually come through to the school to perform the fingerprints directly at the school if it's a large number of employees that this needs to happen. Otherwise, they can come into our office or go into one of our other service providers who will be able to do the criminal checks for you. So go and have a look at that. If you've got different questions on that, please make sure to fill those out in the chat, and you can also just email the help desk if you need to perform those criminal checks, and we'll be able to assist you with those as well. Thanks, Michelle. Does it contain special personal information? Quite possibly in our instance, it will contain special personal information. Our case study, however, selected no on this question. Does it contain information regarding children? No, it does not. Does it contain personal information on European citizens? Yes, it does. They do have some teachers, like I said, that are dual citizens and have European Union citizenship. Click Save. System where the personal information is processed, it was just on the server in this instance. Paper and electronic, both level of access control was medium. The control measures in place was policies and procedures, checklists, electronic and physical access control. And then once again, going into these important questions when it comes to the processing of personal information. Is the processing of personal information taken lawfully? Yes, it is. Is it done in a reasonable manner? Yes. Have you applied the rule of minimality? Yes. Is the collection of personal information being done for a specific and explicitly defined purpose? Yes. Have you obtained consent? Yes, we have. And click Save. And then do you notify the data subject as required by POPI when collecting personal information? Yes, we do. Has the retention and restriction of records been formalized? Yes, it has. Is personal information in this area used for another purpose? No. Have you ensured that personal information in this area is updated? Yes, we do. And are you satisfied that the appropriate security measures are in place? Yes, we have done so as well. And remember to click Save. Going quickly back into human resources and just showing you how this has changed. The reason why this has changed to high risk is, remember, though the volume of personal information is quite low, we might be capturing special personal information, identifiable information, or even information on European citizens. The risk for our residual risk is low, and then behavioral risk is low as well. Michelle, that brings us to the end of our formal training session today. If you've got any questions, you are more than welcome to populate those in the chat now. Even if it's general questions, go right ahead. Michelle is going to ask me those throughout this 15 minutes.
Peter, we don't have any additional questions, so I think we've got through. Well done. You've obviously trained very nicely today and articulated your points well. If I look at the overall picture and we see high inherent risk, I guess the point is we're not trying to get the inherent risk to low risk, because ultimately it can't happen.
No.
It will be inherent simply because of the volume or the type of data we collect. The goal, I guess, is to bring the inherent risk through the behavior risk down to low.
Michelle, You've hit the nail on the head there. Remember, with your inherent risk, you can't go and change this. At the end of the day, you might be processing personal information and high volumes of personal information for certain sub-functions. You're always going to do so. So the inherent risk is going to be set out as high. Regardless, you need to implement different processes, different policies and procedures, and make sure that your action plan is updated so that you are limiting the risk and mitigating your own risk directly through the POPI portal. That's it, Michelle.
And Peter, lastly, if you could just share with our users the action plan. So how do you ensure that their action plan, because ultimately this is what's going to support their process through the next couple months in getting themselves into a low behavioral risk status?
Perhaps it's quite a nice time to share with you. TPN has obviously also gone through this process. We need to do our own personal information impact assessment. We've taken around about an hour a day to go through different of the sub-functions and allocated different actions as we went along when we went through the sub-functions. So I would suggest you do so as well. As soon as you pick up on gaps in terms of your personal information impact assessment, go and add those to your action plans. But to access your action plans, once again, just click on action plan on the left-hand side, and then you can go and add in a specific action. So let's say for today, we're going to do staff training. It's the easiest one that I've already completed on this list. The focus area is going to be for people. The due date, let's say it is going to be the 8th of next month. The task priority, obviously in an instance like this, training staff and POPI is very, very, very important. Just by the way, for those of you out there having a look at the news and having a look at POPI news, Regulation 4 of POPI is going to be implemented on the 1st of May. This deals with the responsibilities of your information officers. And though you can't register your information officers at the information regulator at this moment in time, those responsibilities will still obviously take priority, and you need to do so in terms of those regulations. One of them is actually training or training awareness for staff. Yes, Michelle?
Peter, we've got a question from Sky.
Yes.
She's asking, on the payroll topic, what if the employee doesn't have an email? Can we hand the payslip over to them in person?
Great question. Yes, you may certainly do so. If the employee does not have access to email, you can hand over the personal information, the payslip, directly to the party who the payslip is obviously
Let's talk about how to safeguard that. Peter, how would you safeguard the handing over of that payslip? I would suggest in an envelope.
Yes.
Closed.
Not just that everybody can see it leaving it on their desk, most definitely in an envelope. Make sure you're protecting the personal information that is actually being displayed on the payslip itself.
Because, Peter, it's not just from the point of the delivery, it's the point of where's it printed, to what printer is it printed, who has access to that printer where it's been printed, is it picked up immediately or just randomly left there, and does it enter an envelope straight away, and then so there's many steps along that process to such a simple question.
100%, Michelle. I'm so glad you're saying these things, because I think it really contextualizes what you sort of need to look at when you're dealing with the processing of personal information, and just taking into consideration of payroll. I mean, this ranges from A to Z, from really printing the things right through to processing the personal information through a system. Task priority, we're going to select this as high. The status is planned. Percentage complete is 0. The linked person, I'm going to be presenting the training. And the action, write a little short description like staff training on POPI. Simple as that. Click save, and then it is already going to update in my action plan list exactly the actions that I need to take to be fully compliant with the Personal or the Protection of Personal Information Act.
Peter, no further questions here. Thank you so much for today. I guess it's just good luck to everyone, or good luck. Enjoy the long weekend.
Enjoy the long weekend.
That's coming up for everyone. And I know some of our schools are going on leave shortly.
Yes.
But we will continue with this every 2 weeks. If you're on leave, you can come and catch up in the playlist, any modules that you may have missed if you are lucky enough to be going away. Otherwise, stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Remember, subscribe to the TPN YouTube channel, click the notifications bell for all further training, and you can access all the previous training directly off YouTube. Have a fantastic day and enjoy your break.